Okay, the kids are staying in here this morning, being Family Sunday. Um, I have a question to ask. Is there anybody in here that doesn't like pleasure? Don't really see any hands going up. I mean, we like pleasure, right? I mean, and you may be thinking, okay, how am I going to define pleasure now, and and what exactly does that mean? Is that a trick question? All of those kind of things may be going through your mind. I want you to turn to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a fascinating book in and of itself. Some of it so very hard to understand because of the perspective that Solomon is making the comments. Remember Solomon. Solomon was the son of David, the king. He had become king, and he humbled himself before God himself and said, I don't know how to lead these people. I don't have the wisdom. I am but a child. And God, because of him asking for the wisdom to lead these people, not only blessed him with more wisdom than any other man had been given, and so it was miraculous in nature, but he also blessed him with more riches than anybody else had been given, or and was going to be given throughout the rest of time, actually. I mean, in comparison. And so when we see that of Solomon, then we see some of the things that take place within Solomon's life. Things that we would look at and we begin to say, why in the world would he do that? Well, he explains why he did some of the things that he did. And it's in Ecclesiastes, probably more than anywhere else. But through that process, I mean, even as he becomes distanced from God because of the life that he's living, we hear comments and we read them in Scripture and we say, well, how can that doesn't agree with other Scriptures? It's because he's coming from a standpoint of, this is where I was. This is how I saw things. This is how I felt. Well, he begins this description really kind of in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. And verse 1, he said, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Let's read on. He's going to go through some of the things that he did. I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly, until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven for the few years of their lives. So while I was thinking clearly, I decided I would figure some of these things out while I drank wine. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. What is it that we want to do to bring pleasure to ourselves? What is it that we want to accomplish, that we're going to set out to do? that is going to be greater than what Solomon set out to do. I'll pause for a second because I've lost everybody. We can figure out things that we want to be involved in because we really enjoy to be involved in that. We can set out to plan great things in life or just to have fun. Can it be more than what Solomon did? It's not going to be any more than what he did. And it all tied into this idea of pleasure. I'm going to find out about pleasure, he says. Interestingly enough, in the Psalms, we see a couple of things about pleasure, and we're kind of looking at two sides of a coin here, because we're looking at Solomon and the pursuit that he made. But in Psalm 36, and verses 7 and 8, it says this, "How precious is your loving kindness, O God, and the children of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They drink their fill of the abundance of your house, and you give them to drink of the river of your delights." Does that sound like pleasure? Yeah. But that's something that is in the midst of this psalm of God's loving kindness for mankind. Again, in Psalm 16, if you turn back just a little bit further, and we're just so close to all these, so I just thought we'd go ahead and look at them. In verse 11 of Psalm 16, Solomon's father, David, writing, "You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever." So when we think about pleasure, if we're thinking about all the things that we might be able to do to bring ourselves pleasure, then we end up kind of where Solomon is at. But if we leave it to God, and we're listening to what David is saying in the psalm, and not saying that David had all this all figured out, but prophetic even in the Psalms, speaking directly from God himself, if we leave it up to him, he's going to provide the pleasures that last forever. And so there is a difference in pleasures. And yet, when we look at the wording, when we see what it is, we're still talking about something that is going to cause a reaction within us. We're not made like robots. God has created us to recognize pleasure. That we have emotion, that we have reaction when something is pleasurable to us. And so this approach that we look at, whether it's something that we're seeking directly for ourselves, or whether it's something that God is blessing us with, can make the difference in those pleasures. The New Testament speaks of it as well. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, 2 Timothy 3, I want to read verses 1 through 5 in this book. 2 Timothy 3 says this, and Paul is writing to Timothy, a young evangelist, one that he has worked with, one that he's taken him on the road with, basically, and they've gone to various places. Now he's left Timothy. So Timothy is localized, and Paul is writing to him, and he says this, "But realize this, that in the last days difficult times will come." Verse 2, "For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." Man, what a list, huh? This is what people will become like, Paul says. Could we say this is what people have become like? Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. When we end up loving pleasure instead of loving God, when loving pleasure becomes our focus and a driving force in our life, rather than loving God becoming that driving force in our life, by those who are following Jesus Christ, we should be avoided. Avoid such men as these. In Luke chapter 8, there's a story of the sower that goes out to sow seed, and many of you are familiar with that. And if not, why, I encourage you to read that. Not right now. But in reference to it, the sower goes out and he sows the seed, and the various places that it falls, one of those places is among the thorns, where the worries and the riches and the pleasures of this life choke it out. Choking out the seed, the Word of God. Pleasures can do that. That when we become focused on the things that we enjoy, rather than focusing on God, we forget to focus on God. We forget to let Him be the driving force. Also prophetic in Isaiah, and we're going to look kind of at the Old and then at the New, even though the New is going to point back to the Old. Isaiah 55, it's interesting the statements are made in verse 1 and 2 by Isaiah. I like the way this one starts. Isaiah chapter 55. Ho! Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Sorry, Radonna. She's pointing at me back there. Sorry, it fits. I got to use it. Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Now, automatically, if you're just reading and you haven't read this before, you say, all of you who have no money, come buy and eat. You think, okay, this doesn't make any sense, right? He answers that. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Buy it without money and without cost. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and delight yourself in abundance. Incline your ear and come to me. Listen, that you may live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you according to the faithful mercies shown to David. What he's saying to these people is, why would you spend your money on things that aren't going to last? You ever told a kid that? You know the little quarter machines? I think most of them are 50 cents now. You know, you can put the 50 cents in it, you can turn the thing, and you get something that's not going to last. Don't spend your money on that. That's not going to last. It makes the child happy for a little while. For a little while. Pleasure? Yeah. There is no denying, even Solomon didn't deny that the things that he was involved in, it was bringing him pleasure. Is there anything wrong with planting vineyards? Is there anything wrong with having ponds that you can use to irrigate the forest that you're going to plant? No. having a focus on those things, that being your focus in life, to see what you can do to bring yourself pleasure. Solomon said he was working for these things. He was laboring for these things. He had set himself to the task of doing all of this. And so sometimes we kind of develop that same attitude. I work hard. I deserve this. I've worked for this. I've worked all my life to get to a point where I can retire so I don't have to do anything else anymore. Does that apply to God? I worked all week long. I deserve a break. And so I deserve just to have fun on the weekend. Does that apply to God? Hebrews chapter 11. And there's so much that's in chapter 11 about people who had faith in God, but I'm pulling out one, and it's Moses. If anybody had the chance to have the good life, it was Moses. The good life as we kind of refer to it in the world. Verse 24, Hebrews 11. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. The passing pleasures. Fun to get that 50-cent toy. Yeah. Passing. I bought way too many of those when I was a kid. I don't have any of them. They are so long gone. I don't have any of them. How about the pleasures of life that we get to enjoy? How lasting are they? You know, I think about, I enjoy to eat. And I enjoy to eat different things. I'll pick one. India food. Food that is made with the spices and the curries and the things that they specialize in India of preparing. And love to eat that. But it's kind of expensive if you don't make it yourself. And you can spend the money to go eat that and really enjoy it. If you eat too much, you're definitely not going to enjoy it later on in the afternoon. But even if you don't eat too much, the next day, it's done. You ate it. And you enjoyed it. The food itself, I mean, that's gone. There are things that God gives us that will last. And I don't know that we should even try to list all of those. There are relationships that he gives us. Relationships that are together in his Son. It's interesting. I mean, we see those things, and we know that there are connections. I mean, still, as we see those who have followed him, and the connection all goes back to having relationship with God. Obviously, the greatest relationship that can be given a person on this earth outside of the relationship with God and Jesus Christ, probably the closest other relationship that's going to exist is probably a marriage relationship. But that marriage relationship is not an eternal one. Jesus was asked about that. People trying to figure that out, even trying to trap him with a question. Somebody's been married 7 times because, the husband has died and they get married again. Who are they going to be married to in eternity? He says it's going to be just like the angels. They're not going to be married to people. There's not going to be a fussing in heaven over which one she's married to. But there are relationships that God has granted to us that are supposed to tie together in him, and that doesn't end. And hopefully that's one that we can have with somebody that we're connected to in marriage, but also something that we can have with each other, something that we can have with family members, but most importantly that we can have because we're family, children of God. And that's just one of them. Got a story to tell. Ask the praise team to come up while I'm telling it, and then we've got one more passage to look at. There was a little girl, and this is probably a preacher story. Okay, I don't know if this is true. Bear with me on this. I don't always do this. But there was this little girl, and she saw this set of imitation pearls at the store, and she just loved them. To her, they were just absolutely beautiful, and so she began to save up her money so she could buy this imitation set of pearls, and she did. She saved up $10 and bought this imitation set of pearls, and they were lovely. They looked so great, and she wore them all the time. I'm not talking about just everywhere she went. She wore them all the time. She wore them to bed with her. She loved these pearls. Her daddy came into her room one night, and he said, "Sweetheart, I love you with all my heart. If you love me, please give me your pearls." She said, "Daddy, I love you. You can have my favorite doll or any of my toys, but I just can't give you my pearls. But I do love you." He told her good night, kissed her on the forehead. Next night he went in, and he said, "Sweetheart, I love you so much. If you do love me, would you please give me your pearls?" She said, "Daddy, I told you I will give you my favorite doll or anything else that I have, anything that's in my room. But please, I don't want to give you my pearls." He kissed her on the forehead, and he went out of the room. About 15 minutes went by. He was sitting on the couch. She came down, sat on his beside him on the couch, and she said, "Daddy, I don't want you to think I don't love you." And she took her pearls off, and she handed them to him. He reached into his pocket, and he pulled out a little box that was velvet covered, and he opened it up with a real set of pearls. And he said, "I was just waiting for you to give me these pearls so I could give you some real ones." Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8 says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things." If this lesson in any way speaks to you, or if your week speaks to you, because God is getting something across to you, you need to submit to him. If that's a need for you today, please come as we stand and sing.